Well, welcome everybody. This is the final installment of the 2014-15 Dean Speaker Series, and this is our first ever installment that reflects the merger of poli-sci into the School of Business. And so we've now integrated public policy issues into the mindset or mainstream of what we are looking at in the school. I was lucky enough at a fundraising event for one of the Washington Congress people to meet Jared Axelrod, and discovered when talking to Jared that he is a University of Oregon grad who then went to the Evans School, studied public policy, and landed a really interesting job with Vulcan. And I thought, well, wouldn't it be great to have Jared come here and tell us, share his journey. How did he get to where he is today, and what does that look like, and did he intend to work for Paul Allen, all of that. And so he very graciously agreed to come and have that conversation. I can tell you, I've been a resident of Seattle now for 10 years. Vulcan has had more impact on the city of Seattle probably than anything except for the Seahawks. So, and Seahawks have only been in the psyche, but Vulcan has really changed the very nature of the city itself, in ways which are controversial. You might think of them as positive, you might think of them as negative. Jared's job, in many ways, and he'll describe that his job, is to try to make things work. And so one of the very important parts of our mission here at SPU is to learn how to make things work, and then how to make them work with a set of values that we bring to the table. And so with that, I'm very pleased to turn you over to Jared Axelrod and have him walk you through his journey. Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
There we go. Well, thank you, Dean Williams, for the introduction. It was at a fundraiser, and it's funny you mentioned that it's Vulcan and the Seahawks, because we've worked very close with the Seahawks. Happen to be the owner of the Vulcan, also owns the Seahawks. So, ironically enough. So anyway, thank you for having me. Thank you, Mark Openlander, for all your help in getting this planned. And then thank you all for coming out today, and to the professors for bringing your students by. Again, my name is Jared Axelrod. As Dean Williams said, I work at Vulcan in that role. Official title is Senior Government Affairs Associate. A little long, but work on government affairs and public policy for Vulcan, and have worked there for about 2 years now. Was going to walk you through a couple things today in terms of some of the things I just wanted to cover. As Dean Williams mentioned, we met and we talked, and talked a little bit about, first starting off, a little bit about my background, where I came from. I wasn't that long ago that I was, in your shoes in undergrad, and then later on in grad school. So I want to walk you through some of my background, what I did, and kind of where I have gotten to now. Want to also talk about Vulcan. I think there's probably a lot of interest about some of the things that Vulcan is working on. Some of you may have some ideas about what Vulcan is. Maybe you see the cranes out there in South Lake Union, or maybe stuck in the traffic, but doing a lot of other interesting stuff as well. So wanted to walk you through some of what Vulcan does. And then share some of the lessons I learned, some of the things that I really appreciated and learned throughout kind of my background and my experiences that I wanted to impart on you. I'm not going to be a fountain of wisdom and imparting that on you. I don't have a whole host of wisdom and knowledge to give to you, but I do have some good takeaways of things that I learned that helped me that I wanted to share with you all. And then we'll open it up for Q&A. I'm pretty informal, so so if you do have burning questions in the middle of something, feel free to raise your hand. I don't mind waiting until the end, but we will leave time at the end for some Q&A. So a little bit about me. As Dean Williams said, I started off at the University of Oregon. So I grew up on the east side. I went to lived in Bellevue, Issaquah High School, so here in Washington State. And how many of folks here are from Washington State? Just for a show of hands. Okay. So maybe 2/3 or so. So grew up here, wanted to get away. University of Washington was a little too close. Maybe Wazoo was Well, that was Wazoo, so I didn't want to go there. So I went to the University of Oregon, a little bit further away, and really what drew me there was they have a very strong political sense down there, politically active. You heard about the stuff in the 60s and marching on the administration building and sit-ins and stuff like that, and that seemed pretty interesting. I looked at other schools, but, when evaluating undergrad, and looked at American University in Washington, D.C., because by the time I was applying to schools and visiting schools, I knew I wanted to get involved in political science and public policy a little bit. But Oregon seemed like a good mix where I could get involved and do something on campus, but still stay politically involved and get engaged locally, get engaged at the state legislative level, and then a couple opportunities that took me out to Washington, D.C. as well. At the University of Oregon, I tried to get involved, and on one of the first tours I took of campus, one of the places we walked by was the student government building. So we had the Associated Students of the University of Oregon, ASUO. We probably have something similar here at SPU. But got involved in that basically on day one. I went in and interned and signed up and said, what could I do? It was right in the middle of, it was a presidential election year actually, so there was a lot of voter registration drives going on right around that same time. A lot of ways to get involved politically on campus. It was fantastic. I got in and then started getting more and more involved in student government. I was appointed to a position on one of the program finance committees, and then later next year got elected to the student senate. And then my junior year I was elected student body president of the University of Oregon. So it was a fantastic experience. It was the first time running a campaign or being involved in a campaign. Fortunately, you don't have to raise money. Dean Williams mentioned about one of the fundraisers for an elected official around here. You don't have to do that, fortunately, at the student government level. But a fantastic opportunity that got me very involved and connected in Oregon. So I got to know folks in Salem and in Portland and really all around the state in terms of public policy around there and higher education issues specifically that was advocating on at the University of Oregon. So it was a fantastic opportunity, and really see that as kind of a good starting point for kind of building my career. I had kind of high school jobs before that, but getting involved there was really what I saw as something that was really important. My senior year of the University of Oregon, I went and I knew I wanted to do Washington, D.C. I knew the federal government experience and being out there was something that I really, really wanted to do and strive for. So I went and did an internship for a quarter. Through the University of Oregon, they do internship programs where they give you credit. So you basically could go out, you do your internship unpaid, but you at least get credit for it at the University of Oregon. So you're not missing a whole quarter school. So you probably have something similar maybe at SPU with some of these programs. So did that, fantastic opportunity. That was in 2008, so that was right at the time of Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton going at it. It was the Iowa caucuses, and then which Obama won, and then there's the New Hampshire primaries, which Hillary Clinton won, and then it was off to the races from there. So it was a really, really exciting time to be watching that. John McCain, that whole campaign, watching that unfold in the beginning of 2008 was really interesting, and to be in Washington, D.C. at that time was very, very fascinating. So I finished University of Oregon, graduated. I did my degree. I got a BS in political science and a minor in economics. So anyone here political science or economics majors or minors? Okay, so most of you. So really relevant in that sense. There's a lot of opportunities and it opened up a lot of possibilities. So there are opportunities out there, as you probably heard, for economics majors or economics minors or poli-sci or business, and we'll talk more about that. But political science, I think, is a great major. You can do a lot of things. So I graduated, and then after that, I said I have to go back to DC. I loved it. It was a great time and needed to go back. So I moved back to Washington, D.C., applied for jobs. I literally was sitting kind of in my, moved back in with my parents. My parents actually live right down the street, down on Nickerson. So right in the area, and was applying for jobs kind of all day long. I knew I wanted to get stuff in D.C., on listservs and bulletin boards and Craigslist and different job portals for stuff in DC, for any opportunity I could find. And if you have more questions about, if you have questions about if you're interested in moving to DC and want to know where to look for jobs or something like that after school, feel free to come talk to me later. But knew I wanted to go back out there. Ended up getting a job in Senator Patty Murray's office. So Senator Patty Murray here from Washington State, very, very low-level job. I was answering the phones, I was scheduling tours, I was kind of greeting visitors as they came in. The title's called staff assistant. So that's the one when you call Patty Murray's office and you pick up the phone and then you start telling them about your issue that you want to talk about. That was me on the other end. And so oftentimes what it would be is people, maybe older people, maybe a lot of strong opinions, and they just pick up the phone and they just call and just talk your ear off, and they will yell at you and they'll curse at you, but it's their right and it's their duty, and that's kind of the beauty of the political process. So I was the one answering the phones on the other end of that. It was a great experience. Ended up moving up in the office out there, and again, I moved out there in August of 2008. So about 3 weeks later, the economy collapsed and it just completely unfolded. That was when kind of panic was kind of permeating. What's going on? What's this going to mean? Hank Paulson, the Treasury Secretary at the time, had to march up to Capitol Hill and basically turn over what was really a 2 or 3 page memo saying that we need an enormous bailout, almost a $1 trillion bailout on a 3-page memo. I need $1 trillion. So it was mayhem out there. No one quite knew what to do. The House of Representatives had a vote on the bailout and it failed. And then it was like, geez, what's going to happen here? So it was a very interesting time. And then later in the year, it was very close. It was the presidential election. So that was in November. That was when Barack Obama was elected. There was cheering outside the White House, all this stuff. So being in DC at that time was very, very exciting. Had the opportunity to go to the inauguration, had the opportunity to be there on the Hill for a lot of the great events out there. Inauguration, the healthcare debate, that shortly came after that. So a lot of stuff out there, fantastic time. But there's always a good time to go to Washington, D.C. If any of you have ever spent any time out there, there's always kind of a buzz about it. There's always something going on. You turn on the news, you turn on CNN or Fox or MSNBC, and what's going on the TV is literally what's going on outside. So that was very exciting to be sitting there in the office or at home and be watching MSNBC and then look out into the hallway and see that same person, walking by. So a fantastic opportunity. I worked out there for a number of years, ended up moving up in the office. The new opportunities just became open. One of the next jobs I had was actually the senator's driver. So I would drive her to the airport and pick her up from the airport and drive her to fundraisers. And here I am. I was 21, 22, and sitting next to what is one of the most powerful people in Congress. Very unique opportunity to be in a place like that. To be thinking the reason I got this job was because I happened to know how to drive a stick shift. Her car out there, she had an old Nissan Sentra, she still has it, and it was a stick shift, and they needed someone who could drive a stick shift. So, I was kind of next in line. They said, "Oh, you could drive a stick shift? Perfect, you're in." So, kind of kept moving up in the ranks. I had that job for a little while, and then moved up and moved over to the policy office and worked on legislative matters in a couple issue areas I was focused on, including science and technology, the judiciary, civil rights, space, and then later on some defense and veterans affairs issues as well. Fortunate to have the opportunity to be able to write legislation and author legislation. We actually wrote legislation that would reauthorize broadband programs. So I was really interested in broadband and technology, and later wrote my master's thesis on the digital divide and expanding opportunities to broadband service. I was fortunate enough to write legislation and introduce legislation into the Congress. It didn't go anywhere. It is not law today, unfortunately, but it was fun to at least have gone through the process. And then later, so this was about 2011. I was, really enjoying DC, but knew, I think I want to continue my education. I think there's more that I want to do. I think that to be really competitive, it used to be that you could do an undergrad, but to be super competitive and to really get really far, I felt the need to get a master's degree. So I applied to a number of schools. I applied to American University again, Cal. I applied to Penn, and to UW, and ended up going to UW. So I later became a Husky. So don't fault me for just being a Duck. I later became a Husky. So I got redeemed, at least among my friends who are from the Seattle area, who gave me a lot of crap for going to U of O. So went to University of Washington, and I went to the Evans School of Public Affairs, as the dean mentioned. They actually just changed the name yesterday at the Regents meeting. So now it's what was the Evans School of Public Affairs is now the Evans School of Public Policy and Governance. So we were joking, I'm not quite sure what the governance is about. I see where they're going, but it'll be interesting to see how they unfold. So it was a fantastic program, a 2-year program, as most master's degrees are. You know, when I was thinking, when I was kind of right in between leaving the Hill here and looking to go back to school and talking to a lot of folks, you know, thinking about law school, thinking about grad school, how do I make the decision? Do I want to go to law school? And what kind of stuck with me is someone who was a lawyer, who worked in the office, went to law school. He said, look, you wouldn't want to go to medical school if you didn't want to become a doctor. You go to law school because it's a very specialized training. You go to medical school because you want to be specialized in teaching medicine or performing medicine. Similar kind of thing with law school. You go to law school because you really want to practice law. And if you don't want to practice law, there's a lot of opportunities. And sometimes they want to look for someone who has a JD, but there's a lot of other things that substitute as well. If you look at a lot of job descriptions, they'll say JD, master's, or other equivalent graduate degree. So it's not just the JD. Where you're going to see that you need a JD is if you are going to be a lawyer or counsel. But otherwise, there's not a lot of there are a lot of other things out there that may substitute for JD. So that's why that kind of stuck with me. You know, I maybe want to be a lawyer, but I don't know, not too warm with that. But wanted to get something that was maybe a little bit more, could be used in a little bit more places. And so that's why I decided on a master's program at UW. There's a lot of good things that came of a master's program. So 81% of the graduating class in 2013, 81% had full-time jobs 6 months after graduation. So the concern that, well, what are you going to do with a master's program? What are you going to do with a master's degree? I just, took time off. Maybe you were working full-time. A lot of students had a couple years of work experience before going back to school. How am I going to get back into the job force? It's depending on the economy at the time, unemployment's maybe down in certain sectors. How am I going to find a job? Well, 81%, at least of this class, had jobs 6 months after graduation. Another 12% were seeking. So I think that's probably pretty common, but I think a little bit lower than what you typically find. And then, of course, a couple other people, continuing education. A lot of students in my program did joint programs. So they did a joint MPA/JD or a joint MPA and MBA, or joint MPA and MUP, Masters of Urban Planning. So a lot of different joint programs, and some continued on for 3 years or 4 years or 5 years. And another 2% seeking employment. Everyone wants, after you finish grad school and you spend a bunch of money and you're at school for 2 years straight, or maybe 6 years straight, or if you consider your whole educational career, 18 years straight. But so some people went and traveled and did something else afterwards, and 3% didn't respond to the survey. Another thing, government public sector jobs had a 17% higher average salary than private sector jobs. Now, I don't know how well this holds true, but it is very interesting that this was, of the 2013 class, that government and public sector jobs actually had a higher average salary than private sector jobs. So the concern that, oh, well, I'm going to go to public or nonprofit or public sector and I'm not going to make as much money. I want to make money, but I want to do something good. I want to give back to the community, or I want to work for a nonprofit or work in public service, but I'm not going to make as much money. Well, at least in the case of this class, that's not true. There was actually a number of opportunities, and actually had a higher salary of $57,000 than the private sector, $48,000. Of course, this is going to be different. There's probably some interesting outliers here in terms of maybe some jobs that ended up being way off the map, or a lot smaller. There's maybe a lot of here. So the law of averages may balance all that out, but. With this class specifically, there were a lot of jobs and a higher average salary in the government and public sector service than in the private sector. In the employment in public and nonprofit areas, looking at those for a minute, there was a kind of a wide swath of where people ended up getting jobs and careers after graduate school. So for those that went into government service. So about 12% worked in regional government. So, and I think they're including local government in that as well. So City of Seattle, King County, Sound Transit, maybe PSRC, Puget Sound Regional Council. 12% worked there, 5% national. So about 5% went in Washington, D.C. or some other national government. 15% state, so there was a lot of emphasis and stuff down in Olympia or state agencies. Even, you could even get involved in state agencies here in Seattle if you want to stay in Seattle and don't want to go down to Olympia or Tacoma or any other part of the state. There's still opportunities to work for the state or work for state agencies, but in Seattle or not just in Olympia. In the nonprofit world, about 24% went into domestic nonprofits, so local nonprofits, local NGOs here in the United States. About 9% internationally. So the Evans School had a big Peace Corps program. A lot of students that either went to the Peace Corps, were in the Peace Corps, and then went to the Evans School, or were going into the Peace Corps right after school. So about 9% went internationally for some nonprofit work. 4% other philanthropic work. 5% in healthcare. So for healthcare organizations or hospitals or other health centers like that. And then the private, it's kind of private and not public sector, but the consulting and social enterprise, about 15% working in some of this consulting and social enterprise work. So a lot of opportunities there, kind of a wide swath. Of the graduating class, Washington State remained the location choice for about 76% of graduates. So, the concern that, well, I want to work in government, but I have to go to D.C. or I'm going to have to go where there's more jobs than that. That's not always the case. About 76% of people of the 2013 graduating class actually found jobs in Washington State. So if you want to stay in the Seattle area or in Washington State after graduate school, there's plenty of opportunities to do that. There's also opportunities in other places, like we said, about 5% international, 5% in New York. There's a couple opportunities in California and D.C. And then the other places, but for by and by, about 3/4 of the graduating class found jobs in Washington State and stuck by. So you don't always need to go out and find stuff. If you like it here, there's certainly opportunities here. So some of the key takeaways from that. Graduate degrees do lead to jobs after school. It is possible. There are often well-paying and good-paying jobs that are out there. You don't need to go to the private sector to make money. As we've seen, there are a lot of opportunities out there, and you could actually make money and good money. I mean, I know that's not always the case. This is the school of government and political science, and maybe not a lot of nonprofits. Not all about making money, of course, but for those that everyone kind of has that struggle internally. That I do kind of like making money. Is that bad? I don't know. But you don't always need to go to the private sector. If you look, frankly, for a lot of public sector or government jobs, and often they'll post the salary on there, you'll see, depending on the experience, that there's some actually good paying jobs out there. And then there are companies that want people with graduate degrees in Washington. There are companies out there here in Washington State that do want those kinds of degrees. They do want students with backgrounds in government and political science and economics, in business, certainly in business, but a lot of places. And in Washington State, you just have to know where to find them. You kind of have to know what to look for. You have to expand your opportunities, your thinking in terms of some of this stuff. But the concern that what am I going to do with political science degree, or what am I going to do in economics degree? There are opportunities out there. There are things, jobs out there, companies that are looking for people like you. So so you just have to know where to look for them, and you have to be meeting people and expanding your network. So I'll talk a little bit more about that later. But okay, so looking at Vulcan. So like Dean Williams said, I work at Vulcan. I've been there about 2 years now. Here's a shot of our headquarters. Our office, we're not actually in South Lake Union. We are here in the International District. The reason is because, so Vulcan was founded in 1986. Paul Allen and his sister Jody Allen started the company in 1986. And at that time, they were over in Bellevue, in an office over in Bellevue. And then they were going to move to Seattle in the early 2000s, maybe 2000, 2001. And there was no South Lake Union, so there was no office like this in South Lake Union at the time. So they settled down here in the International District. So this is 4th Avenue right here. If you kind of look this way, stadiums are here, and Chinatown ID is kind of right over there. So a great space here. Vulcan's mission is to seek to change the world by adding value to people's lives and improving their quality of life. Very broad and lofty mission, as mission statements often are, but very high, big picture, big thinking. What's going to be the most impactful? How are we going to improve people's lives the most and improve their quality of life? So how do we do that? So Vulcan creates and advances a variety of world-class endeavors and high-impact initiatives that change and improve the way we live, learn, do business, and experience the world. So we're always looking for these high-impact initiatives and endeavors that's going to change really people's lives and how they do business and how they interact with one another. So what are some of those? You probably are familiar with some of them, but maybe not some others. So I'll kind of walk you through a couple of these things. So one, it's the investments. Most notably, probably most of you know, and generally in the Seattle area, investments specifically in real estate. So done a lot of real estate development in South Lake Union, which we'll talk more about. This is a shot back here of the Amazon campus that we developed for Amazon, for the global headquarters. But do a lot of other investments in other places as well. Second, it's our philanthropic initiatives. So we have a pretty broad and growing philanthropic portfolio of things that we work on, not because they make money, but because they're impactful and improve people's lives and make the world a better place. Science and technology is another one. So we'll talk about some of the things that we're working on in science and technology in terms of cutting-edge breakthroughs in medical research and other science and technological advances. And then the sports and entertainment. We're really shaping, I think, the way that we interact and entertain people here in the Seattle area and around the world. So a lot of fun stuff. Our organization. So Vulcan isn't just Vulcan Inc. It's actually a lot of organizations underneath this. So of course we have, everyone kind of knows Vulcan Inc. and maybe Vulcan Real Estate, but there's a lot of these other ones that we work with or are kind of affiliate organizations of Vulcan that we work on. So for example, it's the museums, including EMP Museum, which you may be familiar with over there at Seattle Center. The Flying Heritage Collection. So Flying Heritage Collection is up in Everett. It's up in Payne Field. It's Paul's personal collection of World War II era planes and now tanks that are up to flyable condition. And he puts it on display and open to the public. You can't fly them and you can't drive the tank, as much as I've tried, but opens it up to the collection. They have various fly days and opportunities to see those things. Out there. We also have the Living Computer Museum. The Living Computer Museum is down in SoDo, down on First Avenue, right before you get to the Starbucks headquarters. Again, Paul's collection of vintage era computers, obviously as the co-founder of Microsoft, and always had a large interest in computers and technology. So all these computers that he's collected over the years, he has folks, really smart people, to fix all these computers up, and they're actually all working, or most of them are in working condition. So you could go and play on an old Apple II computer, or an old IBM mainframe, or an old teletype machine. Really, really cool stuff down there. I encourage you to check that out if you haven't. It's the science and technology. So the Allen Institute for Artificial Intelligence created a couple of years ago, doing some interesting breakthroughs in artificial intelligence and research. The Allen Institute for Brain Science, which is coming up on its 12-year anniversary now. They are currently in Fremont, actually almost right across the cut here. Doing some really cutting-edge work in brain science and brain diseases like autism and dementia and other kinds of things like that. And then the Allen Institute for Cell Science, which was announced last year, doing some cutting-edge breakthroughs in terms of cell science. So those will actually be moving and going to be moving to a co-located space down in South Lake Union in the proximity of some of the other life science and biotech organizations down there. In terms of some of the other entertainment things that we have going on, obviously you probably know the Seahawks, you probably have heard about them. Portland Trail Blazers, Paul owns the Portland Trail Blazers, so basketball season is always a lot of fun. Even though we don't have a sports team here in Seattle, we do have one down in Portland that we root for, and so that's a good time. The Cinerama, so the Cinerama down in Belltown was slated to close, and Paul went in and purchased it and fixed it up and kept it open. So it's a fantastic just a great place to see a movie. If you haven't been there since it's been remodeled, it was remodeled last year. Very, very comfy seats, very, very amazing place. I think they're showing The Avengers now too, so definitely check that out if you haven't. The Hospital Club is a space in London. This was actually used to be a hospital, I believe a women's hospital out in London, and now was again scheduled to close, kind of fell into disrepair, purchased it, fixed it up, and now it's a very great event space that they have for events. And Prince Charles came by there a little while ago, and they hold kind of different seminars and convenings and events and receptions and stuff like that out there. So talking a little bit more about investments, and as you can see, this is South Lake Union, one of our kind of most proud accomplishments in terms of some of the investments that we have made in the area. You can see, I think this picture is fairly up to date, I believe, but there's probably even been some more developments, especially on this block right here, which is where the new Allen Institute is going to be moving in. And have a short clip here about some of the work that Vulcan Real Estate is doing, so we could check that out.
Here at Vulcan Real Estate, we believe in starting early, thinking big, working together, and looking ahead. At Vulcan Real Estate, we have a portfolio of about $2 billion. We have commercial office, we have retail, we have residential. We have a triple bottom line here. We need to deliver a market return. We want to have a positive impact on the community, and we want to be leaders in environmental sustainability. Our biggest accomplishment, certainly in the last 12 months, was the sale of the 11-building complex we developed for Amazon.com, their new world headquarters, a $1.1 billion transaction, which was the largest office sale in the country in 2012. In 2010, we acquired a building in Tempe, Arizona, and by bringing new businesses, a whole line of retail to that building, we're able to essentially connect downtown Tempe with Tempe Town Lake. We sold that at the end of 2012, and that really reflects the type of work we as an organization like to do. I think the achievement that I am most proud of, really, of course, is the redevelopment success of South Lake Union, which is physically located in the center of the city of Seattle, but had been neglected for 50-plus years, and really was crying out for investment and revitalization and redevelopment.
Well, if you think about South Lake Union, mid-2000s, buildings were boarded up, people were moving out.
It was tired and worn out, dirty, dusty, and a place where the public would never dream of stopping.
So when we started out our redevelopment efforts in South Lake Union, the neighborhood was essentially littered with empty parking lots, warehouse buildings that were falling down, gas stations, but we like to think of it as a bit of a diamond in the rough. And so we went about trying to think about what were the issues that were inhibiting the redevelopment, which informed our thinking around the needed infrastructure investment and needed improvements to make it into the world-class neighborhood that we believe it has become.
It's a kind of a miracle, almost overnight. I've been living here for over 50 years, and we hadn't seen a single change, and then all of a sudden, kapow.
The working relationship Group Health has had with Vulcan has been terrific from the very beginning. This was the product of, clear aligned goals and innovative thinking about how we could put this deal together, and it's based on trust and allows us to feel like this truly is home for our headquarters.
Being in a state-of-the-art, environmentally energy efficient building is an important component to us and to our workforce. It puts us in a more vibrant part of the city with close proximity to lots of our partners, and it's been an attractive place to recruit and some very talented people.
As I learned about the vision that Vulcan had, I signed up.
Vulcan was very focused on not just the present but the future.
We think it's an important community value to enliven the streetscape and make it interesting with unique, authentic retail in addition to national retailers, with commercial office, with residential.
Well, the process of working with Vulcan is really a very positive one.
Vulcan has been really an active participant with the city in the public-private partnership concept. Vulcan is now engaged with the redevelopment of more thousands of housing units so that we have low-income people, middle-income people, high-income people, all living in the same area. They're also engaged in the community in really supporting nonprofits.
Culture and the arts are hugely critical, whether it's music or dance or theater. And I mean, just the integration of all of that makes for a very rich cultural experience.
One of the things that's really important for the city of Seattle is that we integrate our cultural life with our economic and social life. And Vulcan has been a great contributor to public art projects, and they've also preserved our historic heritage. They're putting those buildings to use. It's a matter of saying, let's repurpose these buildings and make these historic buildings part of the way in which the city operates.
So looking ahead really means challenging ourselves to be on the cutting edge, but not the bleeding edge. We want to be as forward-thinking as possible while being mindful that we have a positive impact here on the communities where we work.
So a good little piece here. You'll notice it's a little out of date. This was made at the end of 2013, so maybe some of the numbers are not quite the same anymore, and some of the elected officials in it are not elected officials anymore. But I think a good showcase of some of the work that real estate's doing and does a good job of demonstrating kind of our vision around real estate. Continuing to do real estate development, continuing to do work in South Lake Union, especially as you probably drive through there. There's still a lot of cranes and stuff going on. Some of it are our buildings, some of it are other developers. And then also looking at other opportunities in the city and in the region as well. We have a project up in Yester Terrace, a mixed income community of about 600 units that they're doing up there in 3 different buildings. Have a project up in Bothell, redoing Bothell City Hall. So continuing to look at other opportunities in the region. Moving over to the philanthropic initiative, this is one that I really work on a lot. So again, we know kind of the real estate stuff, and a lot of people know about some of the real estate work that we do, but a lot of the philanthropic stuff is actually something that I think I'm really proud about, and I think Paul is very proud about in terms of moving beyond just some of the investments, but stuff to how to give back and how to use kind of his resources for good. So do a lot of great stuff in the philanthropic area. Great Elephant Census being one. Great Elephant Census. So Paul has had the fortune of spending a lot of time in Africa and has spent a lot of time in Botswana and Tanzania and Kenya and other places around the country and has seen firsthand the effects that poaching and wildlife trafficking is having on these elephants and other animals as well. But then when you would hear about 5 elephants were killed last week, or 10 elephants were killed last week, there's no sense of scale. Is 5 elephants a lot? Is that the last 5 elephants? Is that a drop in the bucket? There's really no sense of scale as to how many elephants are actually out there. So the Great Elephant Census kicked off at the end of 2013 as a project to literally count all of the elephants that are in Africa using aerial surveys. So you see this shot from a plane here. Literally counting elephants all over about 22 countries, all over the continent, to establish a baseline, to establish data, so that governments and ministries over in Africa can better prepare their, whether they're their anti-poaching teams or wildlife teams, to get a better sense of scale and baseline data. And that's really kind of what Paul believes in is in looking at the kinds of projects he likes to work in and be invested in is stuff that's really going to establish a data benchmark and give us a good sense of scale for a number of different things. One that I'm particularly working on right now that's very timely is a campaign related to endangered species. It's the Yes on I 1401 campaign, or Save Animals Facing Extinction. As we've seen, animals, including elephants, but also rhinos and tigers and pangolins, continue to be slaughtered and used and sold for wildlife trafficking. It's been having some pretty devastating impacts, and actually a lot of these species may go extinct in our lifetimes. So Paul and a number of other coalition partners have started a campaign here in Washington State that would prohibit the purchase and sale of products made from endangered species. So you think elephant ivory and rhino horn and tiger skins and all of that stuff. So that's going to be on the ballot this November. And again, a good intersection of where some of our philanthropic work interacts with the political work as is the campaign, but related about some of the endangered species stuff. That's what I'm working on right now. And then the ocean, Paul G. Allen Ocean Challenge. Paul has had, again, the fortune to spend a lot of time in different parts of the ocean around the world, in Pacific and in Indonesia and all these places, and really has seen the effects of ocean acidification, that the oceans are becoming more and more acidic. They're killing off marine life, they're killing off shellfish and different things. So he founded the Ocean Challenge in 2013 to look at what are some of the most innovative and creative ways that we could address the effects of ocean acidification. And there were two projects that came out of that. One is to a researcher in Australia measuring how coral reefs are impacted by ocean acidification and how, what sorts of mechanisms or defense mechanisms those coral reefs may have to defend itself against ocean acidification. The other project is one here locally from some researchers at UW and NOAA and a couple of other places to look at whether kelp beds, kelp arrays that grow out can help protect shellfish. So essentially, if you have a shellfish bed, maybe up up north or over on the peninsula or something like that, if you protect it with sea kelp, how would that, are those kelp arrays able to filter out some of the acidic water and help those shellfish beds live? So a number of different philanthropic stuff. There's a whole host of other projects that we're working on in the areas of climate, in the areas of habitat conservation, and then of course ocean health. But really looking at what are going to be some of the most impactful projects. What's really, Paul always says, what's going to move the needle? What's going to make the most impact? So it's very, very great to be able to work on some of these philanthropic projects that are going on out there. Science and technology. So Paul, again, he co-founded Microsoft, so always had a strong interest in technology and science and how the world works and some of the mechanisms there in terms of what can be done and how technology can really improve and shape our lives. A lot of different projects going on right now, one of which, as I mentioned, the Allen Institute for Brain Science. Again, they, coming up on their 12-year anniversary now, started off with a mission of mapping the entire brain. How can you map the entire brain and look at all of the little pieces of the brain to be able to identify diseases before they happen, how you can researchers can use that information to help cure diseases and spot diseases before they progress. So you're doing some really, really cutting edge stuff. And again, with the belief in access to data and benchmarking, all the work that they do, the entire brain atlas that they did is all open source. So you can literally go on the Allen Institute for Brain Science website and go into the Brain Atlas page and poke around in there. I don't know quite what I'm looking for when I'm in there, but you could go in, and researchers from around the world, even still, they did this a little while ago, but even still are continuing to use this as a model and as part of their research purposes. Another thing that we're working on, this is going to be a spaceship. This is part of the Stratolaunch system. We have a division within Vulcan called Vulcan Aerospace, redefining the way that commercial spaceflight is done. So you've probably heard about SpaceX and the launches that they've been doing out in Texas or Florida. A new innovative approach to how spaceflight works, which we think is pretty cool. I think is really cool, especially, and so I dropped in a video here to talk a little bit about how that works. There's no audio here, a little bit of music, but there's some subtitles in here that you could check out. So part of the benefits of this system is that you don't need a traditional launch pad where you would launch a rocket. It takes off of a very, very long runway, and those are a little bit more common than some of the launch pads that you'd find in Florida, for example. So again, some really, really neat stuff that we're doing here in the Seattle area. Again, this is not, you don't need to, if you have an interest in space flight, you could do that here in Seattle. You don't need to go to Houston or Florida. There are people and companies doing here. Just yesterday there was an announcement that SpaceX opened their office in Redmond or Kirkland over there, doing the work here in Seattle. So you could stay here if you want to. Sports and entertainment, obviously I think that's another thing that Vulcan and Paul Allen are well known for, and obviously a shot here of CenturyLink Field are the sports teams. So Cinerama, like I mentioned, beautiful facility, again, to encourage entertainment, to have a place where people can go and see movies and enjoy themselves, and really kind of the belief in historic preservation, restoring and preserving a building that otherwise would have maybe been changed into something else. And then, of course, I mentioned the Trailblazers and the Seahawks. Again, very, very, what comes out of the community as a result of these teams is just fantastic. It inspires a sense of community and civic pride. And as we saw, as maybe some of you were down there during the parade after the Super Bowl, it just encourages a sense of pride and a sense of kind of giving back to the community in terms of all the stuff that goes on in SoDo and the nearby area for those businesses and those restaurateurs and all that stuff. So trying to keep encouraging that, and actually, doing our best. As you could see down here, this is the event center down here. Those panels here are actually solar panels on the roof of the CenturyLink Event Center. Largest solar array in the state is actually here on top of the roof. So not many people know that. You can't see it very easily, but a huge solar array out there to, again, try to reduce carbon emissions, reduce waste, and all that stuff. So what do I do and the team that I work on? So I work on a team of about 4, soon to be 5, soon to be 6 people as kind of the company keeps growing and expanding on doing government and community relations. So what does that entail? Lobbying and advocacy is one major one. So I am a registered lobbyist down in Olympia. So go down to Olympia and meet with members of the delegation, of the legislature to talk about what are some of our priorities. So our priorities are those that support all of these different affiliates and organizations. So for example, if it's policies that will help improve transit or transportation opportunities in South Lake Union. Well, that's going to improve some of our tenants and the people who work down there. So we want to try to encourage that and make it easier for people to get around. So we would go down and lobby in favor of transportation. And the same thing with climate. We believe in reducing the effects of climate change and reducing greenhouse gas emissions. So going and lobbying in support of those kinds of efforts. So the direct lobbying and the direct advocacy, going down to Olympia, going to City Hall, going down out to Washington, D.C., is something that we work on to encourage and support some of these innovative and new projects that we're working on. The community relations. So again, as you saw in the video of South Lake Union and of Vulcan Real Estate, we are developing that community. But you know, there were people there beforehand. It wasn't just a desolate place. There was a community and people living there, and a good close-knit community in the Cascade neighborhood. So obviously there have been some issues, and making sure that what we're doing isn't too negatively impacting the community that's there in the Cascade neighborhood. So continuing to build community relations and Vulcan being a good partner in the neighborhood. So we're not coming in and just tearing everything down and putting up a bunch of big buildings, but actually we're giving back to the community. We're putting in public art places, pieces of public art. We're putting in new transportation options like some of the Pronto bike share stations, stuff like that. Being a good community partner is really important. And as part of that, corporate sponsorship. So Vulcan tries to sponsor different events, help out with sponsorships of different organizations in the community. So focus a lot on low income and housing issues. We focus a lot on mental health issues and organizations that work in mental health space, education, news and information. So a lot of small local papers like Crosscut and the like. Support them and some of their efforts to help be good community partners and to give back to the community. And then also campaigns and elections as well. As I mentioned, the 1401 campaign is something that we're working on to use the political process to move forward what we think is a good initiative, some good public policy, but then also supportive, and supporting other ballot measures or candidates that support good policies that we're in favor of. So, for example, some of the transportation measures that were on the ballot last year for King County and then later for Seattle, we were supportive of those. We were supportive of early childhood pre-K education and creating that pilot program here in Seattle. Background checks, that was one Mr. Allen felt very personally strongly about, is expanding background checks for firearm purchases. So a lot of stuff that we work on and use in the campaign process and the electoral process to advance some of our initiatives, and that's something that we and our team get to work on a lot. Okay, so we're running a little low on time, so I'll go through some of the lessons and then we'll open up for Q&A here. So number one of the things I found, you just have to show up. You just have to be there. You have to have a seat at the table if you want to play. Like I said, the reason I got that job driving for the Senator is because I was there and knew how to drive a stick shift. It's literally just about you have to have a seat at the table. And oftentimes is a 5x5 basketball game, for example. One person jumps out. You got to be standing on the sideline ready to jump back in. You got to be there, ready to go when the moment strikes, and to be able to be at the table, because it's going to happen, and you just have to make yourself available. If you want to get involved in politics and working on a campaign, for example, you maybe have to start out as an intern, unpaid, and you're just working there. You're going day in and day out. You're stuffing envelopes. Stuffing envelopes is actually pretty fun. The stuff that's not as fun, at least in my opinion, is going out and knocking on doors. But you got to be out there knocking on doors. You got to be out there in the campaign office. You have to let them see you so that when someone on the campaign, one of the staffers drops out and they have to go back to school or have to quit or whatever, they've seen you. You were there. You were already working. You already know the stuff. You already know what's going on. You have to be there, present and ready to jump in, because that moment's going to strike. 2, build your network. I can't stress this enough. You always have to go and be meeting new people, because people will be opening doors for you. People will be make an investment on you, because when you talk to people and you ask them for things or they ask you for things, they're putting an investment on you. So be there and continue to build the network. Go out and have coffees with people. And that Dean Williams and I, we went and had coffee down the street at Tully's. It's all about continuing to build your network. It's not, they often say it's not they say it's about who you know, and I say, it's actually about who you get to know. It's about who you don't know yet, but who you're going to go get to know. And you read about someone in the paper, and you go and you send them an email or a LinkedIn message or whatever, and you schedule coffee with them or drinks with them or whatever it may be. So continue to build your network in any setting that you're in, whether it's locally here, whether you move to a new city and there's something you want to get involved with. Go out and expand your network and keep building on that, because it's going to pay dividends and it's going to pay off for you in the long run. And then the third is ask. You have to just go out there, and sometimes you just have to not be afraid to just ask for what you want. One thing that my parents always told me is the worst thing they could say is no. If that's the worst thing that they could say, then you're in a pretty good spot. Just going out and asking for stuff is so important, and being able to not be afraid, to not be there, and just to be ready when they say yes, because it's only going to take once. So I was reminded, this quote is something that really stuck with me. So Chris Matthews, probably seen on Hardball, whatever you think of him and his antics on the show, but he had a really good background and has worked a lot in politics, worked for Jimmy Carter, worked for Tip O'Neill, worked in the news. He said, the passport to getting what you want is very often the simple, courageous act of asking for it. When you get rejected, when you get that no right in your face, remember that no is better than no answer. It saves time, which is what you're going to need if you're going to get rejected 9 times out of 10. And all that means is you have to ask 10 times. Because if you get rejected those 9 times out of 10, that means that 10th time it's going to hit for you. So keep asking. It's fine getting rejected. It's fine, people telling you no, because when that 10th time happens, it's gonna happen for you. It only takes that one strike for that gold miner to find that nugget. Maybe they're out there day in and day out. But when they find that nugget, that's all you need. You only need that one yes. So continue out there to be out there and asking for things that you want. So show up, build your network, and ask. So that's all I have. Thank you very much for the opportunity again. Thank you, Dean, for inviting me here. Appreciate you all coming out today. Thank you. So, like I said, happy to take any questions. I know we're, running a little 10:25, so happy to stick around for a little bit and answer anything you guys may have. Yeah.
Well, first of all, fantastic presentation. Secondly, I was wondering, from the mission statement forward, there was a lot of economic growth in terms of growth developments from every project that you mentioned. Would you happen to have data that showed employment growth or things of that nature?
Yeah. So there's a lot of good data on there from on the Vulcan real estate website. I clicked through some of those numbers in here in the video, maybe a little bit quick, but I think like I said, creating. Amazon, just alone has done had immense numbers of growth. Now I may not have the numbers offhand, but the work that they've done in South Lake Union has really transpired to get up there into the tens of thousands of new jobs, and you see how much public investment has gone into the neighborhood in terms of Mercer Street and the streetcar and some of the public art projects. A lot of good data on the real estate page, and I'd be happy to follow up with you on some of that stuff. I don't have some of the hard data offhand, but a lot of good sources for that stuff. I could give you my card, and we could follow up if you're interested in some of that. Yeah.
So your path was one of undergraduate and then work experience and then graduate degree.
Mm-hmm.
Do you recommend that path, or just go undergraduate straight to grad school?
Yeah, that's a great question. There are. That's what I did. It worked for me, and I saw a lot of my other cohort classmates in graduate school also come in with some work experience. I think you'll typically see that on graduate school applications, is that they like to see a couple years of work experience, and it doesn't have to be work, full-time job. It could be internships or summer internships or stuff like that. I think that's going to be pretty typical, though, is you'll see a lot of people there. Now, there were people that came in right after graduate school. So there was at least one girl I know in my program who started at the Evans School just the prior spring, finished her undergrad at Wazoo. So it's not all the time. It's not a hard and fast rule, but it is pretty common. And a lot of the graduate schools will like to see that because they want you to bring something into the university. They don't want to just be giving you the knowledge and the skills and the tools. They want you to be able to add to the curriculum, add to the classes, and be able to speak about some real world experience that you have. So you have your undergrad experience and you have kind of the classroom model, but going out and getting the real world experiences of being able to share some of those things, I think you'll find it pretty valuable. So not hard and fast, but pretty common. Yeah.
So you mentioned the community relations aspect of what you do. What are specific ways that you involve the community and community leaders in these projects? And if you were to get pushback from community leaders that they didn't want you there, would you drop those projects? Or
No, so we try to involve the stakeholders in the community at an early stage. So we're always very kind of open and upfront, especially when it comes to some of the real estate stuff. We know a lot of the Amazon people, so a lot of the business owners and life science folks, and then even some of the smaller folks. So the Trophy store that's down in South Lake Union's been there a long time. They've known us. We've had a great working relationship with them. They've been right there, right in kind of the heart of where all the construction has been going on. So we try to have a good collaborative process with them. City of Seattle, as a lot of these projects have to get permitted through the City of Seattle, they have a pretty strong, a long process for going through and doing community outreach and design review, making sure the community has a chance to weigh in on some of how the buildings are going to look and how it's going to function, and making sure they know how tall it's going to be and all that stuff. So we try to have a good, strong process with them at an early stage and continue to stay in touch with them all the way through. Now, if they don't, we often get pushback because a lot of people just don't believe, necessarily in, God, I don't want a 12-story building here, or I don't want all this traffic and density and stuff that's going on. And I think we just kind of have a difference of opinion. We often hear their concerns and maybe shape our projects maybe a little bit differently to address some of those concerns. So if they say, this is really going to cut off my view, or this is really going to create, too much on-street parking right here because you're not building enough, parking here, or you're going to close off this alley here, so delivery trucks aren't going to be able to get through, so you're going to have to park on the street and block me in. So we get some of that feedback and incorporate it. I don't know if we would just necessarily completely drop a project, just completely, but we would seek to address it, hear out their concerns, and figure out ways to alleviate some of the concerns that they raise. Yeah.
In the real estate video, it talked about the triple bottom line, and I only got the first two. What was the third?
So the return on investment, it was being a good community partner, and then climate, making sure you're good stewards of the climate. So making sure there's good returns for what we're doing. A lot of the real estate buildings are LEED certified, LEED silver, LEED gold. One of our apartment buildings, the Stackhouse Apartments, was actually one of the first LEED Gold residential buildings. So it's very common in the commercial sector, but for residential, it's very, very new. So a lot of one of the first projects to be LEED Gold residential. They have a lot of great, interesting stuff in terms of some of their AC unit that they have down in the garage, in terms of a special kind of chiller and different kinds of climate control things in the units, low energy usage appliances. Those kinds of things. Yeah.
Thank you.
Anything else? Yeah.
What would you say some of the biggest pros and cons are of doing government work versus private sector?
That's a good question. There's a lot of pros and cons, to all of them. I when I got the job at Vulcan, so I've been there 2 years. I wasn't quite sure at first because I went to public school, K through 12 school. I went to a public university. I got my master's degree in public administration. I worked in public service, and then to get a job in the private sector, quote unquote private sector, was a little weird because I was kind of preparing myself to work in government or not, kind of the public sector or government, and wasn't really expecting to be kind of working in a company. But it's all about the opportunities that are out there. There's a lot of opportunities, and I think Vulcan is pretty unique in that you get to work on a lot of things that aren't necessarily just about the bottom line. It's not always about what's going to make us the most money, what's the best return on investment that we're going to make, but there's a lot of opportunities to be involved. So there are a lot of things amongst these companies to be involved in public sector activities. So for example, if you go work at a company like Alaska Airlines, you are going to be working in transportation policy and climate policy related to clean fuels and related to, you'd be working in kind of economics and job placement in terms of wages and all that stuff and benefits. So there's a lot of public sector activities that you could still do and work on even in a private sector job. So there's a lot of, great pros to working in the private sector. Obviously, it's and especially at a place like Vulcan, there's some interesting and nice perks that come along with working that. You get to be involved in the sports teams and the entertainment stuff and the philanthropic stuff, and get to be involved on all of those things. But I really enjoy the public sector as well. I really like working in DC and working for Patty Murray and can maybe see myself going back to the public sector. It's not necessarily, I'm not stuck with one, and you don't have to be stuck with one. Just because you move to the private sector doesn't mean that you can't just go back to the private and vice versa. So keep your options open. Like I said, keep building your networks, and if you see opportunities that come out there later on down the road that may be of interest to you in another place, always, nothing is forever. You could always be flexible in terms of what you do and in terms of the opportunities that you find, whether it's in government, in the public sector, whether it's in the private sector. Yeah. Dean.
What are your key performance indicators? How do you get measured?
So that's a great question. We have some interesting performance indicators. Now, they say political science isn't really a science; it's kind of an art. But I got my BS, so I think there is some science behind it, and there are some metrics that you could do. So, for example, when it comes to community relations, we measure ourselves on things like how many events we put on per year, how many people turn out to those events, how many dollars we put into the community for community events. So we have some metrics like that. Related to some of the legislative stuff, we look at how many bills we got introduced, how far they went, how many votes they got passed, some of those things. So it's not as easy, I think, as maybe a more finance-related thing. But as we learned in graduate school, there are ways to measure things that don't seem measurable. There are ways to assign quantitative metrics on some of these things that would ordinarily maybe a little bit more fuzzy and a little bit more art. And you don't understand this. This is an art behind talking to elected officials. There's no way to measure that. Well, there is. There's how many votes you get, how many dollars you put in, how many people show up. Those kinds of things. Yeah.
How does Vulcan determine what projects to take part in, and what exactly is the process like?
Yeah. So at a place like Vulcan, it all kind of ends up going back to Paul and what his vision is. So a while ago, he had this vision for South Lake Union in the mid to late 90s and what that would be. So there are different projects and different properties that they acquired that they went and developed. There's a real estate investment team to look at what are the different opportunities that are out there. So whether it's in South Lake Union, whether it's in Yesler Terrace, they talked about projects in Tempe, Arizona. They talked about we had another project over in Issaquah in the Sammamish area. And so there's a team by which they kind of look at these when there is kind of a, like I said, they have that triple bottom line. So they look at how each of those bottom lines will be affected by each of the projects and what's going to be a good return on investment, how they're going to be good community partners, and how are they going to be making sure they're having a good impact on the environment. So they look at those things, and it's kind of a collaborative effort amongst that real estate team to look at what they're going to do. Yeah. Anything else? Good. Yeah.
You talked about the nuances between a JD and Masters of Public Administration.
Yeah.
What made you go to an MPA opposed to Masters of Public Policy or even an MBA?
Yeah. I think between an MPA and an MPP, there are some subtle differences between them. A lot of it, though, in my opinion, or in my experience, was a little bit more about the school itself and not so much on the differences between an MPA and an MPP. The school itself, I think, had a greater impact on me. So going to the University of Washington, which had a great program in terms of their public affairs school and connected to a lot of the stuff locally, and they had a great alumni association with a lot of former alumni from the Evans School went on to be port commissioners and city council members and governors and all that. So it's not specific to necessarily the program itself, but more about what the school as a whole can offer. Whether it's American University, you get to be in Washington D.C., you get to meet those kinds of be in that place. So a little bit not specific to the program itself. Now there are some intricate intricacies between, between those. But I really felt that an MPA program for me was, or a public affairs program for me was the best one, and I liked the University of Washington. I wanted to go to UW, I wanted to go to the Evans School, I wanted to be back in Seattle. It had a great, connection to all those other things, a lot of opportunities that could come of it, and that was the program that felt right for me. So not just specific to what the curriculum is going to be, but what are some of the other things that's going to come along with it. Yeah. Good. All right. Well, thank you very much for taking the time. Yeah.
Small gift for you.
Oh, thank you.
Thank
Great.
Jared one more time for being here.
Great.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Mike. Yeah. Appreciate it.